Good morning. Thank you for sitting tight while your bellies are getting hungry. So, my first introduction to positive psychology was 15 years ago in Marty's first MAP class at the University of Pennsylvania. So I was the youngest person in the world to graduate with a degree no one had heard of. And there were only about 10 of us in that class that were looking at applying positive psychology within organizations. And quite honestly, ever since then, there's been a part of me that's kind of always seeking my tribe, my people. I currently live in Barcelona, and that tribe is a little bit small. But with my Dutch last name and the experiences I've had today, I already feel like I belong here, so thank you so much for inviting me. One caveat, this is the first time we're sharing this information, and I'm standing on the shoulders of my team. So open to all questions, but please know that this is fresh thinking and still in development, okay? So please raise your hand if you're a part of the International Positive Psychology Association, if you might be a member. Yes, fantastic. Please keep your hand raised if you're a member of the Work and Organizations Division. Yes, great. So really nice to see you guys in person. For the rest of you, really wonderful to introduce you to a little bit about what we're about. Now, I represent part of the leadership team for the Work and Organization Division. Our mission is very wordy, but we're essentially working to bridge the gap between research and practice and facilitate collaboration. We're also hoping to elevate best research and best practice regarding positive psychology interventions in the workplace. Now, having been on the leadership team since 2014 when the division was launched and helping to draft the charter, I can tell you that bridging this gap has been very much on our mind from the very beginning. You see it in the content we offer our members. You see it in the people that we hold as exemplars. For example, our award goes to the person with the best integration of research and practice. And we realize that part of this gap stems from the fact that conversations are being had at all different levels with different folks. Researchers are asking questions about what they think are the important things to discuss, whereas often the leaders and organizations are asking different ones. So one of the big questions we're bringing together is what makes for an impactful positive psychology intervention in the workplace? What makes for an impactful PPI? So of course, I'm starting with a definition. PPI, positive psychology intervention, explicitly utilizes theory and scholarship from positive psychology to guide, plan, design, and/or implement the intervention. Okay? So it operates on a different theoretical mechanism than most organizational development interventions. Take stress reduction. Instead of seeing this person's problem as something that needs to be fixed, we might use, for example, a job crafting intervention to help them bring out their best at work. So the distinction is the difference in perspective, seeing something or someone as a situation to be fixed versus an asset to be developed. I'd love to know, and I'm going to write it down, in your mind, what makes for an impactful PPI in the workplace? Let's say you're going to introduce a job crafting intervention to a group or a well-being intervention to an organization. What are the criteria for knowing if it's impactful? I'd love to hear what's on your mind. Yeah?
Something that creates a change of behavior.
Change in behavior, great. So it's lasting change. Okay, what else? Engages people. So to take action. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that feels parts of what's already going on, something that's integrated in their lives.
Integrated. Good, so getting to fit. Yeah. Anything else? Good. So it's a priority from the top. Great.
It's not only individual in nature, but it also pays attention to structural problems, because sometimes individual interventions are not enough. There's massive systemic problems.
great. So we're looking at systemic change or considerations at least. And I think there's one more. Fantastic. Good. So that gets at the integration and the fit. Mm-hmm. And there's one. Impacts well-being. You guys are busy, huh? What else? Anything else? Last one. Improves the workplace environment. Okay. Everyone, please stand up. So please stay standing if you've ever designed or implemented a PPI. Please stay standing if you've ever designed or implemented a PPI at the workplace. Okay? Please stay standing if it helped to change behavior. Please stay standing if it helped to create lasting change for the individual or the group. Please stay standing if it engaged people, if it was integrated and fit well with the company. Please stay standing if you address some structural or systemic issues for the group. Please stay standing if it impacted well-being. So, I'd love to hear from you all. I might put you on the spot, I might not. If you don't want to, if bravery is maybe not at the top, it's okay. But the big question is, how do we know? So at the meta level, this is what science is asking, right? How do we know really about anything? And so I'd love to know, maybe for one or two of you, how do you know that it was impactful and created those effects?
So something about the stories that come out of it.
Do you want to talk to them?
Success stories that come out of it, and then how people share those, and those lead to more stories. So it's about the narrative continuing.
That's fantastic. So the narrative continuing, you kind of started the ball and it keeps rolling on its own, perhaps. Good. Do you want to go next? Or did you have anything else to add? Okay. Right there? Would you like to share, first of all?
By measuring the effects.
So what sort of measures?
For instance, the Cambridge Happiness Profiler.
Great. Anything else in terms of how did you know?
I think just like my neighbor, normally you can just tell, people you can relate to it, or people just say, this one things we did last year, we still talk about it, we still use it, we can still implement it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Does anyone else want to share? Yeah.
Yeah, so what I noticed in the team I worked with, that especially one of the colleagues had a complete change in her attitude. As first she was being perceived as always being nagging at the colleagues of whatever was going wrong. And when we involved her in the new project, she became so happy and positive that she was given the opportunity to take responsibility for something, that it changed her entire attitude. And her former leader paid a visit to the team and talked to her, and he gave us feedback that he did not recognize her from before, that she had completely changed.
I love that. Even getting to contagion theory, right?
Yes.
And this ripple effect you were talking about. So thank you. For the rest of us sitting down, please relax, take a breath, give yourself a break. Right? We all have resource limitations in terms of talent and treasure. I'll tell you from my perspective that evaluation is often something that's overlooked. My clients aren't usually asking for it, much less a pre-intervention survey, process evaluation, control groups, or random assignment. And furthermore, there's actually little practical guidance given to practitioners for how we should be evaluating the impact of our work. So why are these questions critical as practitioners to be asking? Well, although evaluation is not straightforward, we argue it's critically important. So with a relatively new field, with the growth of data science, and with the amount of unhealthiness within organizations, it's critical that we as practitioners are able and willing to demonstrate the impact we're having, not only to further the science, but I would argue to actually improve our work and raise the bar as practitioners. So as part of these efforts to bridge the gap between research and practice and to raise the bar, within the work division we created what's called the Positive Organizational Intervention Challenge. I tried to call it POIC, but that has not caught on. So, positive psychology, it's lengthy. And this is an opportunity to discuss what it takes to design, deliver, and implement effective interventions. We had 9 proposals in 2019, this past year. In 2017, we had over 15 proposals, and the finalists have come from Australia, South Korea, Japan, Australia, I think I mentioned that, Mexico, the United States, and the Netherlands. Okay? And we've had 24 reviewers. So these included members of the work division and members of IPA, advisors such as Kim Cameron, Jim Harder of the Gallup organization, and many others, Fred Luthens, for example, on Psychological Capital. And then the finalists actually came to the IPA World Congress to defend and present their intervention, and that was evaluated by some judges. Okay? Now, we initially geared this challenge towards interventions that were in the design phase. Okay? And we found that the submissions actually ranged from kind of pure design to developed but not tested, to really road tested but perhaps not refined. And internally, we talked about this as kind of batter, half-baked, and fully baked. So for example, Hitomi Katsumi's intervention was about fostering compassion in workplace relationships. She was purely in the design phase, so it was ripe for feedback from her peers and these experts. At the other extreme end was Jessica Van Viergarden, local practitioner, and she had created an intervention called the PEP Talk. She had tested this with great success within organizations, and she was ready to scale it to more. So it was a great opportunity to refine that and improve the design. What really has stood out to me in terms of the submissions is the diversity. Not only the positive psychology theories that are used, but the nationalities of the practitioners and the researchers to the design. We've had digital tools for positive feedback, to how do we assess and cultivate positive deviance in the workplace, to positive diversity coaching within the workplace as well. All brilliant, brilliant work, and all available on our website, so you can see more. And I can also provide links to the presentations, so you can see how these were delivered. My initial vision was kind of Shark Tank for positive psychology. It's not quite there, but it's exciting nonetheless. So you shared with me your criteria, which is a great list, and I'll take it back to my team. Our criteria were kind of 4 elements that we used to evaluate these interventions. So the first one was case for intervention. Does this intervention help the organization in a way that traditional approaches do not? And is this something that affects many organizations across industries and geographies? Integration of research and theory, right? So are there clear ties to positive theories, and do we believe these theories will make the targeted change? Ideally, they'd done a literature review, a robust one, to base their recommendations on a body of evidence, not just 1 or 2 studies that were cherry-picked. And in our MAP class at the University of Pennsylvania, we make an important distinction with language. We use the language research-informed over evidence-based. Research-informed means we're using theoretical and empirical principles to inform the construction of our plan. Evidence-based means we're taking a fully baked intervention that's been tested in that particular context, and we're replicating it, which, as you know, is very, very hard and rare to do. Okay, so that's one distinction to know about. Was it innovative? Does it apply positive psychology in a novel way? And was it measurable? Do we know that there are specific actions linked to specific outcomes, and is the ROI, the investment, good enough for the client? And then ethical is something that was not included in the challenge, but it's something within IPA we're thinking about. So I think about 15 researchers, 20 practitioners. we've provided input into creating some ethical guidelines for positive psychology practitioners based on 6 principles. Now, practitioners are free to use these and adapt them as they see fit. They're open source and available down here, and I created a tiny URL link for you because it was very long. So feel free to use that. And really what we've found is that for good-hearted practitioners, it can be very hard to imagine that you would have any unintended negative consequences for your client, right? Nonetheless, very important to think through any of those unintended consequences that we might have. So for example, take healthcare in the United States. A lot of healthcare organizations in the system are implementing what are called electronic medical records. Okay? They've been great for patient safety and outcomes. Monica Warline, a researcher and professor at University of Michigan who works a lot with Jane Dutton on compassion, has been working with not nuns. She's been working with nurses within these hospitals. And with the intervention of these electronic medical records, it's actually been disastrous for many. Again, this is anecdotal, but disastrous for many in terms of the social connection between provider and patient. We know that for well-being, fostering good social connections is really important. When they're going through these electronic medical records, it's reducing eye contact and interaction, which negatively impacts the well-being of not only the patient, but the nurse as well. Right? So if you're only measuring rates of error, we'd say this intervention is really successful. But there are unintended consequences. And if we're not measuring these or looking out for these, they might be happening without our knowledge. So based on these 4 criteria, what did we learn from this non-representative sample? First, that the case for intervention was actually the strongest category, right? They're very explicit about the value that positive psychology offers. They've gotten very good at the language of that value proposition for the client. Integration of research has varied a little bit. So we have work to do as practitioners on establishing what constitutes evidence-based or research-informed. The real gem was creativity. So this was actually the weakest category. I think this gets at the inherent challenge of putting established research into practice. And then we actually started to think about this. Is this actually a bad thing that creativity was the weakest category? Perhaps this represents that as practitioners, we're actually being careful. I think it gets right at the heart of the tension between creativity and remaining credible, that tension between art and science. And so asking ourselves, how far out is too far? And actually, what makes an intervention novel, and to whom? For the evaluators of these interventions in our bubble, perhaps some things didn't seem so creative or original, but to clients, oftentimes positive psychology in itself is a creative and novel way of approaching their problems. So this is an interesting one we're mulling over. From the research side, I want to share with you 2 recent studies from actually the last 4 months that I hope to make you aware of, and they're open source. First was a meta-analysis on positive psychology interventions at work. So we've had meta-analyses of PPIs before, but not in the workplace. This was conducted by our president-elect of our division, and actually his father, Stuart Donaldson, who you might know. He's the executive director of the Claremont Evaluation Center at Claremont University. He helped create the first research-based or research-informed master's and PhD programs there. Okay, so first of all, they took 100 papers, distilled it into 22 studies. They ranged from psychological capital, job crafting, employee strengths, and employee well-being. So the great thing, the affirming thing, is that they found that PPIs that use a positive psychology theory, obviously, are helping to improve desirable work outcomes, such as job well-being, and reduce undesirable job outcomes, such as job stress. So our work is in the clear. However, they found no overall effect on performance. So we need to do research linking these outcomes to performance. Also, interestingly, they found, again, it's 22 studies, but no significant difference between the theory type and the work outcomes. You might know this intuitively. We can use variety of positive psychology theories to target the same types of work outcomes. Something else I want to introduce you to is theory-driven evaluation. Okay, so this meta-analysis actually came out last month, and the theory-driven evaluation chapter came out in June. Both of these are open source, and make sure you guys have the resources. So they've started mapping positive psychology interventions at work. They took the same 22 studies from the meta-analysis and have looked at two key parts to organize how do we evaluate the theories, the measures, and the impact. And so they started by looking at the theory of change. If you work with social purpose organizations a lot like I do, right, the question is, how do you think the change will benefit or impact the target group? Okay, that's the theory of change. It's a shared understanding of how we expect the intervention to cause a change in the work outcomes, such as team engagement or greater team purpose. So I'm sorry if you can't read this in the back, but what they've done for these 22 interventions is they've listed the intervention, the positive psychology theory it uses, the change model, whether it has an explicit theory of change or not. No surprise, most didn't. Whether it has an implicit one, and the expected work outcomes versus the actual work outcomes, and then any supporting literature for similar work. And for the action model, they've contextualized how these theories, when implemented in practice, what are the characteristics or mechanisms that serve as important moderators for creating the change. So for example, the intervention exercises that were used, the intervention protocols, implementers, implementing organization, and target group. So I know most of you have just been introduced to this, but as you look at this, in my opinion, and it's something we've talked about today already, what's kind of missing is an understanding of cultural context or fit, right, for that target group. How do we better understand intervention fit for this target group? So for example, is this a very hierarchical organization or one that values adhocracy or is decidedly teal, right? Is this an organization that's ready, willing, and able to do what it takes to make this intervention successful? Are they doing parallel work? So for instance, training employees on growth mindset. Or are they simply a very diverse cultural group? I think these cultural questions and cultural fit are something that we're obviously very much grappling with. But this is a really great start, because when you look at these 22 studies, you can step back to evaluate the relationship between theory, measurement, and implementation. And my goal is to have IPA help support practitioners to share their evaluation work, perhaps in a format like this. Okay? These are examples, but you'll get the slides. So for future research and application, a few takeaways that we've gotten from these recent research papers as well as the POIC challenge. Number one, we need clear definitions. There has been progress in defining constructs, but we need better instruments and validated measures. Okay? As I just mentioned, future research needs to make clear which type of positive psychology theories are most effective on work outcomes. So let's say you have a client that says, I want to increase work engagement. Well, we've got a starting place to say, actually, theories on psychological capital and well-being tend to impact this, right? Or I need to focus on stress reduction. What are the theories that we're seeing are targeting that? Okay, so it helps you step back. We would benefit from research that compares traditional OB interventions or OD interventions to positive psychology ones. For example, traditional goal setting versus goal setting that might use Rick Snyder's hope theory. Or traditional change management versus appreciative inquiry, right? How are we comparing these different approaches? Practitioner supports, I'm really working on this one, right? Data collection, partnering with universities, researchers, and evaluators. And finally, a little bit more practitioner education. Stuart Donaldson is just finishing up the creation of an online course to help practitioners do this, and I'm hoping to make that available to IPA members. He doesn't know that yet, though, so don't say anything. So obviously, we can make this list a lot more exhaustive, but it's a starting point for the focus of our efforts. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that question I asked at the beginning, how do you know? And I want to know what you know. So we're going to put a discussion wall over here on the side. It's not there yet. I'll set it up during lunch. And it's to continue our conversation about some of these themes. And tomorrow, at the end of the day, I'll provide a short summary of what you've shared. Okay, so here are the key questions I'd love for us to tackle. Regarding impact, what are you most often measuring regarding outcomes and effectiveness? Well-being, job satisfaction, pro-social behaviors, leadership. If anything, what are you typically measuring? Case for intervention, what types of business challenges are you most often responding with the PPIs? So for example, clients facing retention issues, burnout or stress. Right? What's the organizational challenge or problem that you're most often answering with positive psychology? Integration of research, what resources are you actually getting your research and ideas from? And innovation, what does this mean for clients? So to think about the most impactful intervention you've had and what made that creative, original, innovative in the client's eyes. Would love to hear that. I'm going to borrow a term from my favorite professor, one of my favorite professors. Chris Peterson was my favorite, but one of my favorites, Adam Grant. And I'm going to encourage you to be a giver, not a taker or a bystander in this conversation. So please provide your thoughts, because I firmly believe that open, honest, generous dialogue is the best way for us to elevate our work together. So thank you, and see you on the discussion wall.